Welcome back to Why Not Monday. I can't think of a reason. It's Monday. It's a good thing. Got to kick off the week tasting wine. Lets you know you're alive. This is the first of two nights that we're spending in not only Santa Barbara County, but Santa Maria Valley. And we have with us James Ontiveros, who is the proprietor of this label and winemaker. His right hand, my friend, Jared Hooper, who I'm sure many of you know or have met because he ran the beverage at Faith and Flower in downtown Los Angeles from the opening until the closing.
Yeah.
So Jared is, very knowledgeable about wine and ran a great wine program with wonderful, interesting, alive wines. Didn't cotton to same old. But if you heard any of our early conversation, he was at a tasting recently that, tasting classic California and Napa wines going back to the 70s. Name the names, drop the names, my brother.
Oh, sure. Well, we had a bunch of Schramsberg, the sparkling, very famous sparkling, which I believe the 1972 vintage was served at the White House.
That's right.
Were going through Stony Hill. We had some of their older plantings of Chardonnay that have since been ripped up, but they were some of the oldest in the area. Unfortunately, these old vineyards are getting ripped up at a really fast clip, which is a bummer. We're going to be able to see something fun with James's Rancho Vignedo here. And we went into Ridge back to the 70s, which was just stellar. I've still got a little bit of this Ridge 1977 late harvest Zinfandel out of Geyserville.
So you nabbed the bottle of Zin, huh? Okay.
It just fit perfectly into my bag. I don't know how that happened.
Well, I can't argue with that. Okay, so we're going to taste some great wines. I want to show you a few pictures. We'll get the pictures out of the way so that me and the boys can get to shucking and jiving about wine. And James, I stole this off of your website, Ranchos de Ontiveros, up in Santa Maria Valley in Santa Barbara County. A little romantic shot. James, what do you want? You want to say something about that picture?
Well, sure. That's right across the creek from my house. That's the blacksmith shop that was probably the first building constructed on our ranch, because that was the 1880s. There was no Home Depot to go grab your nails or boards. So they probably started with the blacksmith shop before my house got built. And you've seen, Paul, it's a little prettier this time of year when there's grass. What in that photo is all leaf cover, but that's my humble little place there.
Well, it piques my interest to come back and see it again, is what it does.
Can't wait to have you.
Well, thank you very much. Our next slide, I love doing Google Earth because, just because. So here we have the whole of Santa Barbara County. And I know you strain a little bit, but you can see how the mountains are going more or less east-west. Of course, now, if we think about the mountain ranges in California, well, the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate collided, and that really created mountain ranges that run north and south. But then the Pacific plate started folding underneath the North American plate, and that created, along with earthquakes, this shift of this mountain range here in Santa Barbara. And what that has done has created an allowance. The mountains would have blocked the winds, but now we have these valleys that come off of the ocean and allows wind and fog to move in and move out and regulates the climate. And James is going to talk more about that, but I thought I would give you an overhead picture of that. Before we then zoom down, you see Santa Maria. We're going to come and see Santa Maria, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. There it is. And so, if you can see all those little blocks of vineyard, because, Santa Maria, knows they got the good stuff there. So they've planted vineyards all over Santa Maria Valley. And you can really kind of see the southern ridge that cuts below Orchid. And what is that? Is that say Sisquoc?
That's right.
Yeah. What you want to say something about that?
Well, you've led us perfectly down the path so far. I mean, with
The
Santa Maria Valley,
path, yeah.
with Santa Maria Valley, you're framed by to the north the San Rafael Range, and as we start with the Rancho Viñedo Chardonnay, if you were standing in that vineyard, you're looking directly up at the San Rafael Range to the north, and so it's got a little bit of a south-facing aspect. And then as you, of course, look to the west, you've got the ocean. To the south is kind of a sub-range called the Solomon Hills. And so the Solomon Hills actually is the geographic boundary between Santa Maria and the Los Alamos Valley.
Los Alamos. So I tell you what, give me a second. Let's
Sure.
just go to this next slide just to get, understand that Santa Barbara has its acknowledged wine growing regions. Santa Maria Valley, Santa Ynez. I guess those were the two valleys that started Santa Barbara wine, viticulture and winemaking. It wasn't until later that the western end of Santa Maria Valley felt they needed to secede from the Union because that area west of the 101 freeway was so much cooler and it was a whole different fruit set that was appropriate there than the rest of the San Ynez. And it's gone on, and we have other wine regions that aren't really shown on this map. I just like to show pictures. So let's get out of the picture range. Oh, Gaviota. And okay, here we go. So James, wave and say hello. There's James Ontiveros. And on my computer above him is Jared. Jared, wave and say hello.
Hey there, everyone. How are you?
And Jared, why don't you tell me and the rest of us, how did you get horn swallowed? Is that the word? Whatever it is, how did you get roped in? Roped in. That's a good word to use, roped in. How did you get roped in? And everybody else will figure out why roped in is a good word as we go on.
As we get there. I love that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. Well, as a sommelier in Los Angeles by way of New York City and Bridgehampton, I came out to California in 2008. And that's when I started to help open a place in Pasadena called Noir. And we had one of the biggest lists of California Pinot Noir that I've ever seen. just a little bit of everything, a really amazing list. And
Sorry, where was that again?
Noir in Pasadena, it was on Mentor Ave.
Oh,
So we had just a tremendous list of California Pinot Noir, and it was really graduate school for me in California Pinot. And at the end of every day, we would sit down and pop a bottle and just, learn a little bit more. And so I had been cellar master and putting this whole list together for, months. And I kept picking up James's bottle of the Native 9. He's changed the label, but if you see on that 2012 you've got there's a big old horse on it. And I kept looking at that bottle and going, oh, what is this? What's going on here? What's happening? And I finally popped it one day and just was totally blown away. It was the 2004 vintage that I had, which was James's first commercial vintage. And it just blew my mind. And I knew that I had to meet this guy. I had to find out what was going on. So I think that very next day I emailed him and said, hey, I came across this bottling. I'm coming up to Santa Barbara soon. I want to meet you and I want to taste with you. So he said, okay, sure, no problem. Come and meet me at this road. There's no sign. There's a piece of plywood with a spray painted number on it. So I turned up that road and we got to a shack and I met James, his partner and winemaker at the time, Paul Wilkins, and Dieter Cronje of Presqu'île. Presqu'île was not built yet. It was still being built. So I met the three of these guys and we tasted through and got to know these wines. I immediately fell in love with them. I think everybody's going to really get a sense of what we've got going on here. And Paul and I sort of talked about the vintages we wanted to play with, and we decided to bookend with a 2012 and a 2017 Pinot Noir. To tell a little bit, James should probably be the one to tell you this, but I guess I'll go ahead and go with it.
Please.
The style of these wines here and the reason that we have these vintages is it's one vineyard, one farmer, 1 year. And that's what happens every time. And each year it's kind of a calendar. It's a farmer's almanac. We get to see what happened that year. And that's really the beauty of these wines as we get to go through. So today we're going to be tasting the 2012 and the 2017. I'm not going to give you any tasting notes yet. I don't like tasting notes. I think they're rude and they get in everybody's way. I want you to just kind of experience it on your own. But you're going to get a chance to really see some of this 12 and the 17, the differences that time makes. And I'm going to give a kind of a shameless plug here. We just got 4 out of our 6 available vintages just made the Wine and Spirits magazine year's best US Pinot Noir list. So that's huge. And I'm really proud of what we're doing here. And I think they're right. I think these are pretty special wines.
braggart.
That's what I do.
All right. So James,
Yes, sir.
how is it that you went into this wine thing? Your family's business isn't wine.
No, I grew up on our family's cattle ranch, which is in the Santa Maria Valley. And I'm probably, in actuality, so that to go back to the name Native 9, I'm the 9th generation of Ontiveros's back grandfather to grandfather, all the way back to 1781 when Josef Ontiveros came into Alta California from Mexico and wound up being one of the puebladores of the Los Angeles area, helping settle that area. And his son applied for a land grant, which today is the cities of Anaheim, Placencia, Yorba Linda, Brea, Orange, and part of Fullerton, called El Cajon de Santa Ana. And clear back into there, as part of the grant, they were farming vineyards. They had to say what they were going to do with the land. And we've been in vineyards and cattle to different degrees, all the way back to those generations. And it was his grandson who wound up selling off most of that land grant to acquire the Rancho Tepesque land grant, where, again, they planted vineyards and ran cattle. And that's how I grew up. Not in the wine business, but we farmed and mainly cattle. And as Jared mentioned, the horses on the label were very much just kind of part of a personal, piece of my life. When you grow up doing that, I wanted everything I did to be more reflective of a reality of our lives, not something of a marketing story. And so when I was 23 is when I planted my very first vineyard on our family ranch, which actually overlooks the Rancho Tepisque land grant that my family had, but is not part of it. And so the horses are on there because not only part of my history, but when I planted that vineyard in 1997, I was on the rodeo team at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. So I'm still a recovering rodeo guy. And that's kind of why all these connections. Native 9, that's my family story. And the horses, that's part of who I am and our family story. And when we started making these wines, the first vintage Jared had, at that point, I was the director of sales and marketing at the Biennacido Vineyard, which is directly across the street from Rancho Viñedo, the Chardonnay we've got tonight. And I was very aware that to go roll out a brand, you have to really have something, or it's better, I should say, if you really have something to say. Not just, the world doesn't need any more brands, in my opinion. But with what we had been doing there for as long as we had, and I'd spent so much time focused on really high caliber producers and vineyards, I saw a shortcoming in what looked like wines that were more interesting to me. And those were wines that were more fresh and savory instead of bigger and richer, which there seemed to be a whole lot of terrific versions of at that time. So that's kind of in a nutshell, that's kind of my background and how it relates to Native 9. Rancho Viñedo, the Chardonnay, that if we were trying that first, I didn't plant this. It precedes me. It was planted in 73. I wasn't born yet.
That's the year I graduated high school from West Hill High School in Stamford, Connecticut. Yeah, class of 73. I'll drink to that.
This is a pretty terrific classmate.
I agree.
So this was planted then to Wente Clone Chardonnay, and I was fortunate enough to be able to take this vineyard over about roughly 10 years ago, and we just love making these kind of lean, brisk, mineral-driven Chardonnays from this site. The one you've got tonight is a 16.
Actually 17. We got 17.
You got 17.
17 Chard, yeah.
I'm drinking 16, but I know the 17 very well. I've been drinking more of it. So it's I think what you'll find in those wines is just a terrific amount of mouth-watering acidity and minerality with the fresh savoriness that I would just say for most of my career, you didn't find these kind of wines coming from California. And that was what I wanted to make, was something of a similar style to what I had fallen in love with from the old world. And that's what we do. So there's some fun to be had here, hopefully.
Hey, James.
Yeah, this Chard. Oh, go on, Jared.
Well, I was going to say there's a neat story here that if we have time for it and it's not too geeky and it's the kind of thing people might be interested in.
We can do a little geek.
These vines are own rooted. So I think that's kind of cool to talk about what it means to be own rooted versus being on rootstock, how rare that is, and how old these vines are, and how old they are in comparison to any of the other vines in Santa Barbara County.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I would say at this point, own rooted vineyards, that certainly is a very small percentage of what you're going to find in California. Oftentimes things like phylloxera or nematodes or some type of virus in the ground is going to prevent own rooted vineyards from being planted. I'm a believer that there's something really unique about a vine that doesn't have a graft union, where, I always try to use the example of like a walnut. when you drive by a walnut orchard in California, you usually see this great big rootstock and this much smaller English breed of walnut growing out of it. And it works, but there's a difference there, and how those things get translocated from the roots up to the shoots and the fruiting wood and ultimately the fruit. It's going through a bit of what I would call just a filter, where having the opportunity to work with own rooted old vines where there is no rootstock and no filter, and especially with this kind of vine age, now 73 planting, this will be our 48th vintage on these vines. I think there's an ability just to show even in more of a unique element of sight there. And I grow grapes for a lot of different projects, but I only make wine from a real teeny amount. We do about 200 to 300 cases of the Chardonnay, and likewise with the Pinot per vintage, just one bottling a year, and that's it. And I think this vineyard just exemplifies what can be special about a healthy older vineyard in a climate that is the right climate for this variety. And we genuinely try to just not get in the way by doing too much and affecting it in a way that would change what we're getting here kind of naturally. So super, these are going to be roughly 12.5, 12.8 alcohol. So very lean wines, but they don't lack at all for weight. There's a lot of concentration because there's tiny yields on these old vineyards. I think that makes it, a bit remarkable in today's California market that's got so many different things going on, but usually are on a much more voluminous scale. So.
I will say that this is my personal style of Chardonnay because I love the bright acidity. And this is something that Santa Maria Valley, where your vineyard is prone to making. And it's so funny because I've had Chardonnays from Santa Maria that, what am I trying to say here? Well, the up and the downside, this is, as I started off this conversation, we're talking about this east-west valley and the fog and the wind blows in. So it's naturally a very cool climate. And that cool climate helps slow down the sugar ripening while maintaining the acid in the grapes. Of course, because we are California, where 9 months of no rain, there are a lot of winemakers that will leave those grapes on the vine longer, waiting for those sugars to rise beyond what is, in my not so humble opinion, beyond what is necessary.
Yeah.
We want to get that beautiful balance of sugar and acid and concentration of flavor in the grapes. And then what else do you want? What do we really have to wait for more sugar to make just for alcohol? I say no. Just drink more wine if you want more alcohol. So this is my style of wine. And everybody else can make their own decision. Right. But I'm grateful to you for giving this to us.
Paul, I call this Chef Chard.
Chef Chard. There you go.
This is Chef Chard. This is the kind of stuff that chefs that are wine savvy, that are working with food, that are looking for something that's really going to pair and create something wonderful. That's what we have here. This is that foil that gives that bright crispness, that rinses us, that gets us ready for another bite of food. Absolutely. This is something that really becomes very special. I think that part of the reason we have the ABC movement or anything but Chardonnay is we've had so much time with these big oaky buttery shards that on their own, they're a meal. You know, it's sort of, you've got your wine, you've got your meal in the glass. These are the Chardonnays that are really set to work with food. There's really truly a balance going on.
Yeah, yeah. You take a sip of this Chardonnay and all you want to do is pucker up. Let's kiss. Okay. We've got 2 Pinot Noir in front of us that we've got to talk about. So we've got the 12 and 17 Pinots, and let's talk about, you know, the similarities and differences of the harvests, and maybe similarities and differences of what we did in the winery after the grapes were harvested. James, what do you got to say? No one's got anything to say. James.
Oh no, he might be on mute.
Oh. Are you on mute? Yeah, put your glasses on. Let's get that mute up.
Still on
There we
mute.
go.
There we go.
That should do
He's
it.
back.
I think with the differences and similarities of 12 and 17, you know, the most obvious, of course, as we look at these wines, is that this has a tremendous amount of bottle age in the 12, and it's a fairly recent one with the 17. But vintage wise, 12, 13, 14, and 15 were all part of the severe drought of California. 12 was on the earlier side of that. Whereas we get out to the 17, we had a really good rain year in 2016, and causes the 17 to kind of be able to bounce back to another, you know, back to a level of freshness in the vineyard where we had strong canopy growth. And these wind up being very similar type of vintages, just from the fact that 12 was an early part of the drought and 17 had come from, you know, a good rain year prior. We make the Pinot Noir 100% whole cluster. That started, Jared mentioned my first, what I call commercial vintage, when we sent the wine out to the press and really tried to, you know, go establish it in restaurants, in the marketplace. That was the first year that we did whole cluster, and we did half of it 100%, and we did the other half destemmed.
Okay,
And
so that we're all on the same page. When we talk about whole cluster, that means that he's fermenting the grapes with the stems and seeds. And well, of course, the seeds, you can't get rid of the seeds, but a lot of red wine is made by taking the grapes off of the stems and fermenting just the grapes. By using the stems add aromatics, but they also add tannin, just like you get tannin out of the grape skins, which is a natural preservative to the wine. And we feel those tannins as a residue on our teeth and gums. Take it from there.
Oh, I just got to compliment you. Are terrific with this, and there's no, you know, no surprise why you have such a great club that you get to work with, because I love your approach. Is this always helps with a little bit more explanation, because to your point of a minute ago, very little wine in the world is made whole cluster. I don't know a real number, and I don't know how we would find one, but I'm going to guess well over 90% of the wine in the world is destemmed. And so this brings out flavors and textures that really oftentimes we're just not that familiar with. And that was one of the things that I fell in love with, is, as I mentioned, my first vintage of doing this was 04, because it had been so hot that I thought the wines would wind up, if we didn't take a step like this, being really just simple and overripe and potentially just not that complex or interesting. So starting from 04 and going forward, we've always been a whole cluster house. So we pick everything with scissors, essentially, a little hand pruning shear by hand under lights in the middle of the night. And we put it into lightweight boxes so that we don't break the berry with compressing too much fruit. It's a very inefficient, unmodern way. But what we've found is that it's the best way if you're trying to make a wine that has these characteristics, is that's the way you've got to do it. To your,
I hear you. And,
to your
you
earlier,
know,
please.
if I could just interrupt you 1 second, and I don't want to be, yeah, I do. I want to be a name dropper here. Yeah, so James is right that most wines are made by destemming the grapes. And, you know, all of a sudden I'm blanking. Who was the Frenchman that, Jared, you can help me here. I'm blanking.
Dujac?
Was it Dujac? No. He did the Montmarsan, Henri Jaillet. Okay,
Oh,
thank you,
Jaillet.
Jared. Henri
Cool.
Jaillet was the king of Burgundy style of de-stemming grapes.
Yeah.
To make wine, to make very, well, delicate. I mean, I'm not going to say anything bad about Henri Jaillet. He's, you know, I wish I was related to Henri Jaillet. However, there was another school of Burgundians that believed in using the stems that the grapes grew on. And the two most notable of those houses are related houses, although they kicked her ass out. Oh, excuse me. Because there's a famous winery, maybe you've heard of it, called the Domaine de la Romanée-Conti. And then La Loubise Leroy, whose family were part owners of Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, and then she started her own Leroy label. Both of those houses, who are some of the most collectible of Burgundy producers, believe in using the stems at least partially. Some, you know, every harvest is different. So how much stem is going to go into the batch is defined by my mother. You know, Mother Nature defines how much stem we want to include. But those two houses are the classic producers of stem inclusion, and James is in the line of succession.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's a good line of succession.
Dude, you run in good company.
You know, I'd like to jump in for a second and say that, and James, you know, let me know if you disagree here, but I think that a part of this style and something that's really a signature of these Native 9 wines, and we've spoken of this whole cluster, I think it's a long-term strategy. And I think that
Absolutely.
most of the wines, most of the things James does, he's always looking down the road to see where something's going to be. That's really the goal. It's not just what we're going to get tomorrow. It's what we're going to get tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And to that point, this longer version means that these wines take longer to get to where we want them to be. So when we taste this 2012 and this 2017 back to back, and I would really encourage you to really do try them both and see the difference between these. And know that these are the same grapes from the same vineyards made in the same style. But what we're seeing is the time in the bottle. So to that point, this 12, this is really a vision of where we like to see these wines. This is at a place that we're excited about how savory, how interesting, how beautiful, how otherworldly this wine is. And this 2017, while it's so pretty and fruit forward, in many ways, this 17's not ready yet.
Yeah.
There are the 2018s on the market that people are already jumping on. This 17, I'm happy with this and I enjoy this. And if you prefer this to the 12, that's great. Go ahead and pull your cork on the 17. But to where I see these wines going and to my personal sort of emotional connection to them, I feel like this 17 has at least 2 or 3 years before it's going to start really strutting its stuff and dancing on the stage.
I'm there with you also because, you know, if you put your nose in the 12 and then put your nose in the 17, that 17 is really kind of primary. Mm-hmm. And the oak is sitting there on top of it. When you go into the 12, that oak influence has really integrated into the wine. And so it's really just, we don't talk about, oh, I get fruit, I get oak, you get wine. And the 17 needs a little bit of time. I mean, I have to say, it's very pretty fruit.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I don't mind drinking this 17, but the 12 is really, you're right. The 12 is the goal of what we're looking for, which means you do have to have a little patience. You buy it, you tuck it away, you drink other wines. I always say you buy a case of wine, you crack that first bottle to gauge the wine and where it is. And then you say, oh, you brash little baby, go, oh, no. And then you tuck it away. And then a year later, you come back and you crack another bottle and you say, oh, I see. You've been good, but, maybe a little more time. Anyway, it depends on the wine. I'm being playful.
No, but I agree with you, Paul. And I think that this is kind of the beauty of these is that you can drink the 12s while you're waiting for the 17s to open up. And it's really a special chance. We, James and I really believe in the vertical of these wines. And one of the things that we love doing is popping a series of these together and being able to see where they are and to do that vertical and to jump.
Well, to your point, Jared, that's why we chose to resubmit these wines out for critical review to folks like Wine and Spirits, who just did this nice review of our vertical for 6 years last month. And this was when I started this project, the goal was to make wines, and first vineyards and wines that were very age worthy and that also had some ability for, of course, enjoyment in their youth, but really had the ability to stand the test of time. And I would be totally candid and say I don't drink anything that's 18, 17, 16. I might start to look at a 15 once in a while, but until Jared at Faith and Flower robbed most of my cellar of 05, 06, 07 to 09, those are the wines that really are bringing me the most enjoyment. And that's how we try to create these wines in the vineyard, is that the whole cluster element does give them to Paul, your point of a minute ago. 04 was when I started whole cluster because I'd spent time in Burgundy in 03, which was the hot vintage.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And drinking wines from whole cluster houses like Dujac and visiting and drinking out of barrel at DRC. That was when I walked away going, okay, on a warm year, this is how you create a more savory, balanced wine instead of having something that's flabby and uninteresting. And so from that day forward, I always figured our challenge in California is not getting ripeness. It's usually getting over ripeness. And so in a very unique position of owning our own estate vineyards that you can see the ocean from on the right day, let's not worry about getting ripe. Let's worry about taking advantage of physiological maturity before ripeness. And so that's been the goal. And for the most part,
I'll drink to that.
All right.
For the most part, age worthy is what we get. It's that's been the treat.
And I think this might be a good point for me to offer up. We're going to be doing a vineyard walk with James May 16th up in Santa Maria. We're going to start off, it's on a Sunday. We're going to start off at noon. We're going to go to the Rancho Viñedo vineyard, and we're going to go walk through that vineyard with James, and we're going to taste some of that Chardonnay in the vines. So it's kind of fun. You get to drink the wine in the rows, and then we're going to drive. It's about an 8-minute drive from Rancho Viñedo to get to Rancho Ontiveros, where we're going to go into the Native 9 vineyard, and we're going to taste some wines there. And I think Paul and Wendy are going to join us as well. I've got my email information is here. If anybody would like to join us, please come and do that. It's a great thing. It's a lot of fun to be with James in these vines and to taste these wines there. It's something special to see what's actually going on in these old rows.
Yeah, I'll be spending the night because after tasting, I don't know how many different vintages of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, and then he'll feed us into a food coma. I'll need at least a nap and before I go to Bell's for dinner or something like that. Yeah, that is a wonderful opportunity. I taught wine at the Cordon Bleu and then at UCLA Extension for years. And I would say to my students that, you will learn more in one day of visiting a vineyard and a winery than all of my blah, 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 blah. Because when you go there and you feel, the wind, the fog, you see the grapes, you see how they get the sun, you go and you see how the wine is made. That's a real experience. And so I always treasure those moments of going up to wine country and getting a firsthand account. I'm fortunate that I've worked in I spent 20 years at Valentino Restaurant. That gave me carte blanche to any winery in the world that I wanted to visit. And so Wendy and I have been to Domaine de la Romanée-Conti and Domaine Loire, and we've been to Germany and we've been to Italy and we've been to Spain, and I know a lot of I've read a lot. That's been my job, to read and learn, but it all makes more sense when you're standing there and you're feeling it and seeing where it all began. So anybody that wants to go up on May 16th, and I was talking to Sasha about trying to organize a trip up, but because of COVID, we're still a little too early to be able to do something like that. But if you want to get in your cars and drive on up, I'll be there with Jared and James because, it's, really kind of a responsibility for me to go up there and do that.
Love it. Love it.
And so anybody who wants to come up and do it, you'll be welcome. They do have a wine club that, for the $25 that they would, is that what it is to get?
Yeah, it's for the vineyard walk. It's, if you're not in the wine club, it's $25, but we waive that if you join the wine club. And what we tend to find is that if you come and do a vineyard walk with James and you check out these wines and you get to see what's going on, you're going to become a member of the wine club. And it's great. It's a lot of fun. And these walks are awesome. We have a lot of sommeliers come up from Los Angeles to come hang out with us and to do these. And like Paul said, I've been very fortunate in that I've traveled to Germany, France, Spain, Italy, Australia, Greece. I get to go
Australia.
Yeah.
Now I'm really upset.
And those are amazing trips, and I love them. But amongst them, I really think doing these vineyard walks with James, those are some of my favorite. It's something special.
Oh, well, it's the real deal, Australia.
That's right. Hey, Paul, do we have any questions from your crew?
Hey, crew. Well, what you got? You got something to say?
Any comments or thoughts? Or
you're being shy? Although I don't see my Huranis. They didn't join me. They came for chef's table this week. Maybe they've had enough of Paul for 1 week. I don't know.
I'll ask something. Why is the 2012 seems a lot lighter in the glass than the 2017?
That's a great question.
James,
James, you want to?
let's let James talk.
Yeah, he's on mute. You're on mute, James.
Oh, you're on mute, James. Oh, and there's oh, thank
There we
you.
go. So in general, the longer these wines age, I would say the more they're just going to kind of continue to open up. And the biggest difference to me is 12 is really where, for me, this is the drinking moment. Where 17, it's still, as I love how however Paul said it, that tannin structure from the whole cluster is kind of wrapping that 17 pretty tightly in that tannin preservative. And so there's more texture in the 17. And also it just, to me, comes across as a bit more tannic and more grippy. Whereas the 12 is now fully opened up. These wines are not filtered or fined. And so an unfiltered wine like this is going to continue to really evolve in a way that's showing that kind of peeling back of layers.
So in 5 years, will a 17 look like this as far as color?
Yeah, perfect question. So I would say, Jared and I were just tasting 12 and 14, which I always say they were kind of a match. And I think, I mean, I won't kid you. We only know when it does that, right? When it's made those 5 years worth of journey. But yes, that's generally what we see is there's a trajectory. And that's why we only make a couple hundred cases of wine a year. So it's not like we're like pushing the wines, but that's why Jared and I've shared the beauty of seeing a vertical is once you've tasted it from one place, one winemaker, you really see the arc of how these wines perform and age. But that is right. And, the 14s are still brawny and a little bit more than the 12, and the 17's just a baby. But I think the marker that Michel Chapoutier, who's kind of a crazy guy, I love one of his sayings, which is fruit is to wine what disco is to music. It's just one data point on the chart. And I think what the 17 and the 12 both show you
is music.
Is that there's a lot more going on in these wines than simply fruit.
Yeah.
And even in
no disco, this ain't no party, this ain't no fooling around. Anyway, I want to say something here. So Pinot Noir is sorry, James, I just got carried away.
Please, this is great.
So, wine gets its color from the grape skins, right? The dye is in the skins. Pinot Noir starts off as a thin-skinned grape. So, we're not going to get, a very dark extracted unless there's some kind of monkey business going on.
That's right.
And what happens, the color and the tannin molecules are floating in the wine. And when tannin molecules touch, they bond. And they start to make these molecular chains of tannins until the molecular chain gets so big it becomes solid matter and it falls out of the wine. And when that falls out, it's taking pigment with it. So that's one of the reasons why the 12 is noticeably lighter. The change in pigment is more the addition of oxygen bleeding through the cork that is changing the pigment. It gets lighter from tannin fallout. The pigment change is a subtle change from oxygen. And so if you put your nose in the 17, along with the fruit, and yes, I mentioned the oak, but there's also, a little hint of green that is also some of the extract from the stems. Stems add aromatics, add an aromatic complexity that makes it not just a tutti frutti, oh, ruda. Oh, yeah. So, I'm sorry, I got so carried away there. Anyway, so
What about the alcohol content, 12 versus 17? Does that stay consistent or?
Yeah, so 12 in the 12 vintage, so I always just put the truth on the label. So 13.5 on the 12 vintage and 13 without my glasses.
13.8 on the 17.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, go on.
We're generally shooting for a ripeness that's in that kind of a potential alcohol range, but Jared carried the 11 was the 11 vintage was like 12.2, I think, and yet if we don't think that the maturity is there because the whole cluster component is so important, I've had plenty of wines that go into the 14s. It's really not so much shooting for potential alcohol as making sure that we've got our physiological maturity right in the vineyard before we make the pick.
And then how long do you think you could keep a 12 if you were going to put some in your cellar? I mean, it seems like super chuggable right now, and you wouldn't want to keep it any longer.
That's where I'm at. I mean, I think this wine's still got plenty of pleasure for another year or two, but this isn't probably the most age-worthy vintage that we've made. I just had, again, Jared leaves me with nothing in the library. We just opened the 09s. We opened when Paul was up. I want to say one of the 04s.
We did a 4 at a Magnum, and it was stunning.
Yeah, the 4 was fun.
And those wines, frankly, were in years where I was probably making them a little bit bigger, just in the style. And then as I tended to dial it back, 12 is kind of in the middle of the road in terms of its stylistic, target. But I think this wine's got another, easy year, but it's in the drinking window now, where if we tried 13 and 14, I mean, and please, Paul or Jared, I think the 13's got an easy 5 years and the 14 at least another 5. So
yeah,
I would say in general, these are kind of 10 to 12 year wines, pretty strong.
Well, and James, I think you really kind of nailed that by saying that the 2012, while it's beautiful right now, and I do agree with you, I think it has a few more years, it doesn't have the long-term structure that some of the other vintages might have for longer term.
Absolutely.
And I think that what's so much fun about getting to know these wines so well is that, there's the typical line is that these wines, they're kind of like your children. And you love all of them, but they have different personalities. And it's a very common thing for winemakers to say.
Gee, Jared, how well do you know these wines? You've been drinking a lot of Native 9, I have a feeling.
I know these wines pretty well. In fact,
Starkle, little twink.
Well, to that point, Paul.
Yes.
And this is kind of a joke between James and I. When the 13 vintage first came out, and as he mentioned, this was the first vintage to really start showing the effects of that drought. And because of this drought and because of this heat, the wine itself was a lot burlier than its predecessor. So I tasted the 2013 and I took personal umbrance. I got upset, and I thought that James was changing his style and going for a more modern Pinot Noir. So I almost immediately got on the phone and called him up and said, "Hey, Ontiveros, what are you doing? This isn't your style. You're changing things up." And I started name calling and accusing him of going for a different style with his wines. And James, as he does, he just kind of laughed and he said, "Hooper, it's just what the vintage had to say." And I said, no, don't give me that. I don't. You're doing a different style. I can taste it. This is a big thing. He just laughed. He said, "Listen, that's what 13 wants to tell us. Just wait and see." And he was right. And now when we come back years later and we see the 13, yes, it's bigger than the 12. Yes, it has a higher alcohol content. Yes, it had brighter, bigger fruit, but it started to kind of mellow out and do its thing and to change. And
let me put a little explanation and context. So 10 and 11 were kind of cool and wet vintages, more wet up north than what happened down in southern or Santa Barbara. But they were, and Santa Maria doesn't always has cool climate, but this was a little cooler than normal 11, and maybe a little bit more rain. 12 was 12 was a more typical vintage, and of course, what we didn't know in 2012 was that it was going to be the first of what then became the drought years, 12, 13, 14, and 15. And every one of those years subsequent, we had more and more concentration of flavor and earlier ripening of sugars, so that you had to maybe wait a little bit longer for flavor, but that meant the sugars would rise. So then 16 came finally, the break in the drought, the rain, and that refilled, so that for the 17 vintage, it was as if we were starting again, like we did in 12. So the 13th is more concentrated. The 14 is more concentrated. By the time we get to 2015, what happened to me? I lost myself. I don't see me. Can you hear me?
we can hear you.
Okay,
hear you,
fine.
Paul.
You don't have to see me. You can hear me. So the 15 vintage is something that's going to take a lot of time because we have so much concentration. Oh, thank you very much. Because, I'm pretty. Anyway, that's my Ali, right? So anyway, so James is just, he's doing his job. When the grapes, the biggest, most important decision that every winemaker has to make is when to pick. And if you have the same person making that judgment call every year, you will have the most consistency within your wines. But my mudda's always gonna be the one that's gonna, make the call.
Right.
And so that's what I got to say. Well, to answer you, Beth, Pinot is all about, cherries and strawberries and cranberries and raspberries. In these wines, it's more of actually, it's kind of interesting because the 12 has so much strawberry showing in it, whereas that young brash 17 is more in the cherry raspberry, maybe even a little bit of, I don't know, Jared, you got another kind of maybe a blackish fruit?
Well, I would agree with you, Paul. I think we're going into darker fruits. This is back to my earlier thing. I know that people always want us to give them tasting notes and to use fruit for those tasting notes. And while I think that those are useful, it really detracts for me from what's happening because, cherry, come on, get out of here. I can get cherry in the supermarket. I don't want cherry. And, what gooseberry? When's the last time I had a gooseberry?
I get cherry in my Chardonnay. Oh, no.
Yeah, it's easy. But I think that what is happening here is, well, sort of two comments I want to make. You spoke about the picking decisions, and I think that comes in and that plays such a role here because not only is James making the picking decisions every year, this one single vineyard is on his family's ranch. It's walking distance from his house. He planted these vines himself. So these are, you know, a personal extension of what he does. He's the farmer. Half the time I talk to James, he's on a tractor or he's out there doing something in the vines. It just happens to be the one place on his property